Long ago, when the goddess Nuwa was repairing the sky, she melted down a great quantity of rock into 36,501 large building blocks. One single block was left unused. It lay at the foot of Green Sickness Peak and possessed magic powers. It could grow or shrink to any size it wanted. Later, a Buddhist monk and a Taoist priest brought this stone into the world of mortals, where, in time, it grew into one of the undisputed classics of Chinese literature, The Story of the Stone, also known as A Dream of Red Mansions. That laid-aside stone stands for both the protagonist of the novel, Jia Baoyu, and the author himself, Cao Xueqin. A seemingly calm and peaceful winter night in a small courtyard in Beijing's Western Hills in 1763. Little does anybody realize it, but a giant is about to breathe the last breath of his short life. Childless, aged just 48, only his weeping wife will be present when the end comes. But he'll leave behind a precious legacy, a masterpiece destined to endure down the ages and bring honor to his name and his country. That giant, of course, was none other than Cao Xueqin, the author of A Dream of Red Mansions, or The Story of the Stone. For 250 years now, ever since its first publication, the book has remained an enduring cultural phenomenon. Hailed by leading Chinese intellectuals as a matchless novel, a masterpiece of cosmic scale that touches on the melancholic nature of human life, and a work that forever changed traditional thought and literary style.
毛泽东主席啊，对《红楼梦》有特别高的评价。他在他的名著《论十大关系》当中，他甚至于说中国呀，那他的那个大概的意思就是对这个世界的贡献应该更多。说我们当然我们现在地大物博，人口众多，是吧？历史悠久。另外我们还有 《红楼梦》
Nanjing, otherwise known as Jinling, Zhenkang, or Jiangning in ancient times, had been adopted as the capital of Imperial China by 6 dynasties. The city was, for a long time, the economic and cultural center of southern China. It was also the city in which literary legend Cao Xueqin was born. Today's Jiangning Imperial Silk Manufacturing Museum is located on the site of the Qing Dynasty Jiangning Silk Manufacturing Bureau. Before that, in the Ming Dynasty, it was the residence of Prince Han, otherwise known as Zhu Gaoshu, the second son of Zhu Di, the Ming Emperor Chengzu. In the Qing Dynasty, the Cao family headed the bureau. In those days, locals still referred to it as Residence of Prince Han, which shows what a famous and prominent place it was. Indeed, the facility did more than just oversee the manufacture of royal clothing. It also kept a close eye on southern officials and was authorized to report directly to the emperor himself. Cao Xueqin was born inside the bureau in 1715, just as Emperor Kangxi's reign was drawing to a close. But it wasn't just the end of the line for the emperor. The once thriving Cao family's fortunes were also on the decline, mirroring the fate of the Jia family in the novel. Older servants would even recount to their young masters tales of the glory days of the family. Did they know that Emperor Kangxi had honored the family by staying in this very mansion on 4 of his 6 trips to South China?
曹家直接可以呼吸通地座，而且和康熙关系最密切的人呢，就是曹雪芹的祖父，叫曹寅。这种关系是在中国历史上和家奴的关系这么密切，和内务府的官员这么密切，也是很少的。
In the novel, the Jia family boasts numerous plaques and couplets left by the emperor himself. Likewise, there is a plaque in the Jiangning bureau that read Xuanrui Hall. The calligraphy done personally in Emperor Kangxi's own hand when he met Cao Yin's mother, Madame Sun. This blessed old lady happened to be the emperor's nanny when he was a child. Seeing such an old familiar face in springtime filled the emperor's heart with joy. As far as he was concerned, the old woman was part of his family. It was the blooming season of the orange day lily, the flower that symbolizes motherhood in Chinese culture. That's why the emperor wrote the name of Xuanrui Hall, literally meaning Hall of Exuberant Orange Day Lily.
所以女性在满人家族里面，她到某一个程度的时候，会有蛮高的一个位阶发言权，啊，所以贾母就是这样子的一个状况。她跟曹寅的这个嫡母啊孙氏其实是很接近的，因为曹寅的父亲比较早死，他的这个嫡母孙氏呢活得非常长久，就有一点像小说里面的贾母。
In 1704, Cao Yin was appointed Salt Commissioner for Jiangsu Province, with his office in Yangzhou City. The next year, he was tasked with compiling Chuan Tangxi, or complete Tang poems. He then set up the Yangzhou Poetry Bureau in the Tianning Temple. After a year of hard work, the book, including over 40,000 poems in 900 volumes, was published. It is the largest collection of Tang Dynasty poetry. Later, Cao Yin was commissioned to compile another monumental work, Peiwen Yunfu, or Rhyme Treasury of the Admiring Literature. Tragically, by the time Cao Xueqin was born, Cao Yin had already passed away. Emperor Kangxi's death would follow several years later. The Caos retained their position at the head of the bureau, but their time in the sun was over. They were out of favor with the new emperor. With friends and relatives being removed from office or jailed one after another, Cao Xueqin's father was naturally anxious. However carefully and cautiously he behaved, was he destined to suffer the same fate? Despite the downhill trajectory of their fortunes, the Caos could still afford to hire some of the South's most renowned teachers to tutor the youngsters of the family. During his spare time, Cao Xueqin enjoyed sneaking out to chat and play with peers from an opera troupe retained by his family. And surely the enormous collection of books left by his grandfather was, for him, a seemingly inexhaustible source of knowledge.
He probably read the whole of Chinese poetry because his grandfather, Cao Yin, was the editor of the Quan Tang Shi, and all the Pei Wen Yun Fu. I mean, so probably Cao Xueqin in his young days had read everything, He certainly read like, Tang Xianzu and Ming Chuanqi, Kun Chu. I'm sure he read Jinping Man. He was incredibly widely read. But more importantly than that, he had a certain sensibility, a very highly strung, very passionate, and a born storyteller.
所以我们从曹寅的几万卷藏书当中，你看一下练亭书目，什么书都有。做菜的书，茶叶的书。如果没有这样的一个条件， 《红楼梦》作者再有本事，他没有条件呢，没有图书馆可以看书啊。
Emperor Yongzheng was the bridge between two golden ages. Before him was the age of his father Kangxi. After him would come his son Qianlong, the two longest reigning emperors in Chinese history. In total, these three emperors reigned for 130 years, an age that would witness the rise and fall of the Cao family, the publication of A Dream of Red Mansions, and its growing popularity across China. Even though the author claimed that the story had no discoverable dynastic period, it was undoubtedly set in the aforementioned two flourishing ages. In a sense, the backdrop for the novel is best summarized in the words of Charles Dickens, an English novelist who would achieve a similar level of celebrity in the following century. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way.
There are nearly 1,000 characters in A Dream of Red Mansions, and almost half of them have names. How would one portray such a huge number of characters? It must have taken Cao Xueqin, a literary master, quite some effort. A meticulous reader would find that the only character that appeared in both the first and the last chapter is Calrop. Why did the author favour her? Because Calrop is the key to understanding the historical background. Calrop was born in Suzhou, a place depicted in the book as one of the 2 or 3 wealthiest and most fashionable quarters in the world of men. Her father, Cao Xueqin, was in his late 40s when she was born. Naturally, he loved her dearly. Originally named Yinglian, she was a beautiful child who, things going well, would be married off to a husband ready to join her family. The idea was for the couple to stay in Suzhou and look after Yinglian's parents while they raised their own children. But it was not to be. She was destined to live up to her full name. Zhen Yinglian is a pun on shall be pitied. And sure enough, tragedy struck. During the Lantern Festival, when she was just 3, Yinglian went missing after a house servant took her to see the lanterns. The Zhens searched everywhere, but she was nowhere to be found. Close on its heels, calamity struck again when the Bottle Gourd Temple next to Zhen's home caught fire. Quickly spreading, the fire destroyed their house, and the Zhens barely escaped with their lives. Thereafter, they had to move in with Mrs. Zhen's father in the village. Life took a downward spiral, and Cao Xueqin eventually became a monk. But what of Yinglian? She'd been kidnapped, and the next decade was to be a hellish one for her. When she reached the age of 12, she was sold in Nanjing to a young man named Feng Yuan. He hadn't been much interested in females until then, but when he saw Yinglian, he fell in love with her at first sight. He paid the kidnapper and agreed to come back to take her in 3 days. Things were about to get a lot worse for Yinglian though. The kidnapper, greedy as he was, reneged on the bargain with Feng Yuan and sold her to a local big shot called Shui Pan instead. But the kidnapper's scheme unravelled. Nabbed by both parties to the fraudulent deal, he was beaten to a pulp. However, with both families more interested in Yinglian than the money, Shui Pan turned on his rival Feng Yuan and beat him to death, dragging Yinglian off with him more dead than alive. Shui Pan disappeared without a trace. The Feng family brought the case to court, but no one wanted to handle this hot potato until Cao Xueqin, a newly appointed Nanjing magistrate, came along. Once, when he'd been a poor student, he lived in the temple next to Yinglian's home, and it was only thanks to the assistance of Yinglian's father that he was able to go to the capital to sit the Imperial examinations, which he passed. Now the case had come before him. Fortune at last seemed to be favouring Yinglian. Having learned what happened, Cao Xueqin said in a towering rage, "This is monstrous. Am I to understand that a man can be beaten to death and the murderer walk off scot-free with nobody lifting a finger to arrest him?" He was about to issue a warrant to arrest Shui Pan when he observed one of his ushers signalling to him with his eyes not to carry on. Cao Xueqin then brought the usher to a private chamber for a talk. The usher turned out to be an old acquaintance, a monk in the Bottle Gourd Temple. he told Jia Yuzun that first, Yinglian's father was his benefactor. Second, the Xue family was one of the 4 most powerful households in Nanjing, who were on a hand list known as the Mandarin's life preserver that every provincial official carried, and if one offended such households, there could be dire consequences. Third, Xue Pan went to the capital to stay with his relatives prior to the murder. Killing a nobody was nothing to him and didn't stop him from going. He didn't run away because of the murder, which was a trivial matter that his men could easily take care of. Discouraged as he learned the whole story, and given that his magistracy position was arranged by the Jias and the Wangs, 2 of the 4 powerful households, Jia Yuzun closed the case by bending the law before hurriedly sending 2 letters to the 2 families stating that their nephew's affair had been settled and there was no further cause for concern.
葫芦僧判断葫芦案，是吧？这种反映当时清代的这个官场状况。而且你看曹雪芹写这一段的时候呢，就显得并不认为这是一个很惊奇的事，认为这是一个司空见惯，当时官场司空见惯的事。用这种波澜不惊的笔法写这件事呢，就证明他心里头对这个社会啊，他有一种很无奈的这样一个状态。
Meanwhile, Xue Pan had brought Yinglian to the capital, where he and his mother and sister were going to stay with the Jia family. Yinglian became just another insignificant concubine in a prestigious household.
In the first 4 chapters of the book, Cao Xueqin had already showed the readers in a seemingly casual fashion through what happened to Calrop the true colours of the above-mentioned 2 flourishing ages, or the so-called Kangqian flourishing age. It was known as a flourishing age because it was a time of relative peace and stability. Also, thanks to the introduction of sweet potato and corn from South America in the early Qing dynasty, population boomed in China. By 1714, the total population reached 140 million, a figure that would more than double over the next half-century.
"那个时期的中国的农民，一个普通的农民家庭，1年辛苦到头，1年挣不到30两白银。那么同样，欧洲、英国的一个农户，他干1年之后呢，按照中国的这个币值来讲，能净剩30多两白银。那个时候，这个欧洲的这个文化，这个经济社会发展呢，已经出现了大量的这个生产剩余。中国农民在康乾盛世当中啊，实际上也不过是1年到头能勉强温饱就不错了。可能很多人呢还春夏之交这种青黄不接的时候呢，可能还得挖点野菜，这一家才能度日。中国这个传统社会这个生产力啊，几千年它没有一个突破性的发展。
A dream of red mansions provides a reflection of the lives peasants led back then, which is borne out by historical studies. When Granny Liu sees the crab banquet held in the Prospect Garden, she calculates that the crabs, liquor and the other dishes couldn't have cost less than 20 taels of silver in all, enough to keep a farmer and his family for a whole year. Another sequence is even more staggering. Before the Chinese New Year, a farm belonging to the Ningguo mansion has their rent delivered. the long list of offerings reads: tufted deer 30, water deer 50, spotted deer 50, Siamese pigs 20, scalded pigs 20, wild boar 20, wild pigs 20, along with 30,000 catties of red charcoal, 2,500 bushels of rice, and 2,500 taels of silver. Bailiff Wu, who delivers the offerings, explains that the harvest that year had been terrible, and the relentless rain and hail had done great damage to crops, livestock, houses, and people. Imagine, with barely enough to get by in a bad year, these poor farmers had to load what little they had onto hundreds of carts and then trudge for over a month through knee-deep snow, in withering gales, on roads that were either muddy when it was warm or frozen iron stiff when it was cold. What misery, what torture existence must have been. Not to mention when Jia Zhen, who was then the undertaker of the mansion, said, "I'd reckoned on your bringing me at least 5,000 taels. What am I supposed to do with an amount like this? I might as well give up celebrating New Year altogether."
因为天气开始变凉了，贾母就拿了一件这个皮球，叫拂叶球，送给了他最喜爱的宝琴香菱。看了这一个拂叶球以后呢，他就说：“怪到这么好看，原来是孔雀毛织的。”可是呢，这个香云他是见过世面，他就说：“你不懂啊，这哪里是孔雀毛啊？这明明就是野鸭子上面的那个毛做的啊！”然后他说了一句话，也许很多读《红楼梦》的人都读不懂。他说：“野鸭子毛做的，那可见老太太疼你了啊！他这样子疼宝玉也没给他穿，那这怎么回事呢？怎么可能孔雀毛比不过野鸭子毛啊？”但是当我们仔细研究以后呢，就发现这就是小说里面那个物质文化最精彩的一小段之一啊。在这里面呢，我们就发现，野鸭子的毛就是那个鸭子的脖子后面呢，它有一块呢颜色比较鲜艳的地方。要做这种拂叶球的时候，就是把这一小块拿下来，并不是野鸭子毛比较贵重，而是可能要杀1-2千只才能够找到大小色泽各方面都能够互相这个平衡的。所以这个故事呢，就告诉我们说，就是拂叶球放在贾母贾家的身上，让贾家富贵逼人啊。
However wealthy they might be, the family that had enjoyed nearly a century of dazzling success was to everyone else a house. Both masters and servants all lead lives of luxury and magnificence, but they can't bring themselves to economize or make any adjustment in the style of living to which they've become accustomed. A society's level of civilization is usually measured by how women are treated. After Shui Pan took Yinglian to the capital, he changed her name to Calrop and made her his concubine. People in the Jia mansions often talked behind her back about how Shui Pan had murdered someone for her, saying that she's a bit like Qin Keqing, a compliment because Qin Keqing, also known as 2-in-1, bears the good looks of both Bao Chai and Dai Yu. The highlight of Caltrop's life is when the kind-hearted Lin Dai Yu teaches her about poetry and tells her that even the language isn't of primary importance. The really important things are the ideas that lie behind it. If the ideas behind it are genuine, there's no need to embellish the language for the poem to be a good one. Next, Dai Yu instructs Calrop to study the works of 3 great poets, Wang Wei, Du Fu and Li Bai while trying to compose a poem about the moon.
你怎么不是什么不是什么晴雯学师啊，不是什么平日学师啊？香菱他有这个根基，香菱学师是茶饭无心，坐卧不定，是吧？睡也睡不着，人都傻了啊！看见什么东西都往作诗上头连啊，一首不好再写一首，最终写出了一首，那个首句是什么呀？叫精华欲言料应难。哎呀，我觉得这个句子就是在写香菱。她本来是一个清净尊贵，是一个渴求有更高今生生活的一个女儿，但是她被掩盖、被埋没了。但是香菱呢，是不甘于沉埋，是吧？不甘于那种很平庸的生活。最后写出了这首诗，光这一句就够了。
The Cao family, much like the Jias, had their share of prosperity. Cao Yin, together with Li Shu of Suzhou and Sun Wencheng of Hangzhou, both tycoons in silk manufacturing, were part of a clique of powerful southern clans. However, knowing the impermanent nature of fortune, Cao Yin had anticipated, before his death, the downfall of the Cao family. In 1712, 3 years before Cao Xueqin's birth, Cao Yin suddenly caught malaria, an incurable disease in China at the time. But quinine, which can cure malaria, had just been discovered in South America and could be found in the Forbidden City. After receiving news of Cao Yin's illness, Emperor Kangxi ordered an overnight delivery of the medicine to be made, accompanied by a message written in his own hand. Do not use the medicine for any disease other than malaria. This is serious. You must make no mistake. Unfortunately, the medicine failed to reach Cao Yin in time, and he died in the summer of 1712. But Cao Yin's death did not spell the end of the emperor's care for the Caos. Knowing that the family had spent a fortune during his sojourns at their house, which resulted in financial deficit for the Jiangning Bureau, the emperor personally appointed 2 descendants of Cao Yin as his successors, plus some 30,000 taels of silver from the royal treasury to make up for the financial shortfall.
我感觉康熙呢，他在整个中国皇帝里呢，他是属于这个人情味儿比较浓的一个，就是让人容易对他有好感。你像在中国历史上，那么人情味儿浓的呢，有那么几个皇帝，你像康熙啊，像这个唐太宗啊，包括像后来的乾隆，都属于这个情商比较高的。康熙他 跟这个曹寅之间呢，他们之间呢应该还有比较真诚的这种人际关系的交流，情感的交流。
Cao Yong, Cao Yin's only son, and Cao Fu, his legal heir, took turns succeeding their father, albeit lacking his talent and capacity. In autumn 1716, in a message of greeting to the emperor, Cao Fu, while reporting the harvest in the south, inadvertently angered the emperor by carelessly mentioning the death of a salt commissioner. In his reply, Kangxi reminded him that mentioning death in a greeting was a major violation of protocol and etiquette. In 1722, 10 years after Cao Yin's death, Emperor Kangxi passed away, leaving the throne to Yongzheng. Thereafter, fortunes ceased to favor the Jiangning bureau. Indeed, if anything, the Caos came to be seen as a thorn in the new emperor's side. Officials, knowing the emperor's mind on the topic, then began deliberately making complaints about the young Cao. One of them once wrote, "I've learned that Cao Fu is talentless and gutless. He lets his butler run the bureau. I met him several times in Beijing, and he's mediocre." Yongzheng, all too ready to agree on a topic about which he'd already made up his mind, replied, "Mediocrity is an overstatement. He is simply worthless."
雍正呢，他是想办事的皇帝，他希望他手底下的大臣呢，也都能力很强，能够整顿击毙，让这个整个大清王朝呢，焕然一新。所以雍正朝用人有一个特点呢，就是他用了很多酷吏。所谓酷吏，就是不打折扣的执行皇帝命令的人。那在地方上显然就会得罪很多人，那你就基本上就要启用新人，因为你要用老人的话，他方方面面的这种盘根错节的这种人际关系，他很多时候他破不开情面。
In early 1728, or the 12th month of the 5th year of Emperor Yongzheng's reign, disaster struck. Cao Fu was removed from office on the charge of harassing courier stations. On the 24th day of that month, to prevent the Caos from moving their assets, the emperor ordered a raid on the Jiangning bureau. When the imperial edict reached Nanjing, hundreds of Cao family members were immediately rounded up. The streets echoed to the sound of firecrackers, the cries and screams of women and children, as well as the ear-piercing noise of furniture and utensils being smashed. Soon afterwards, Sui Hede, the newly appointed director of the Jiangning bureau, reported something to the emperor. A pair of gilded lions had been found in the Cao mansion. These had been kept for Yin Tang, the 9th son of the late Emperor Kangxi, who just happened to be Yongzheng's arch enemy in the struggle for the throne, and had been imprisoned and died in jail. There was nothing innocent about Sui Hede's report on the gilded lions. A plot was afoot, one directed against the Cao clan. During the 6 months or so, when the Cao family's fortunes began to visibly crumble before everybody's eyes, the young Cao Xueqin had every reason to mature far beyond his 13 years.
多少年以后呢？他和他的朋友敦诚敦敏在一起的时候，还经常他的朋友写诗啊，叫“扬州旧梦酒一绝，秦淮风月一繁华”，就是说，江南曹家的繁华兴盛及其衰落的生活，在曹家心中留下了刻骨铭心的记忆。没有这些江南旧梦，没有这些秦淮风月，没有曹家的衰落，曹雪芹也写不出《红楼梦》。因为曹雪芹是个天才，他又经历过这样的生活磨难，因此呢，他才能写出一部传神文笔足千秋的伟大的著作《红楼梦》。
Lu Xun, a leading figure in modern Chinese literature, once said, "Whoever experiences the radical change that comes about when a life of comfort gives way to a life of distress is certainly able to see the true face of the world." And Cao Xueqin, having plummeted from great heights, was certainly given access to this great insight. Now, along with the rest of his family, he was a disgraced outcast. Finally, this formerly rich and privileged child knew what misery really meant. The only ones who would come to visit him were his childhood playmates, the actors and actresses from the troupe.
In a dream of red mansions, Calrop's fate too underwent a drastic change. After taking Calrop as a concubine, Shui Pan married a woman who was more his equal in terms of social status. This new wife, Xia Jingui, daughter of a wealthy merchant, soon turned on Calrop.
有一个特写，就是夏金贵要改香菱的名字，他的理由就是菱角哪有什么香啊。后来香菱是很单纯的一个人，他就是很直说，把他的感受说出来。哎呦，他说不光是花有香，是吧？就算是菱角，就算是鸡头，是吧？就算是那些荷叶，就算那些草梗，你如果近日近夜细细的去体会，也是有一股清香的。他说非花香可比，这个就金贵就大怒，是吧？你把桂花这些放哪儿了，是吧？你这个犯了我的讳是一方面，是吧？你把这些正经的牡丹桂花往哪儿搁？所以就强迫香菱要改名，菱花不香，改名秋菱。
After the name-changing incident, Jingui tried to poison Calrop too, only to kill herself by accident. In the end, Calrop died in labour after giving birth to a son. A tragic end to a tragic life.
它的出现呢，对于红楼梦》后面的所有的女性的角色而言呢，都有一种暗示性的作用，就是说它是一个定调，好像那五线谱前面不是会画一个高音谱或低音谱记号，几个升降记号就定调，它是作为这个定调作用。如果它是一个悲剧人物，它是一个搏命的人物，那后面的这些女性其实基本上是归队的。
As much as Cao Xueqin pitied Calrop, he could not alter her fate. Living in such dark times, this kind-hearted girl was destined to fulfill the prophecy the monk foretold in her childhood. An ill fate had indeed awaited her.
In autumn 1728, the Cao family relocated on the emperor's orders to Beijing. Ever since Cao Xueqin's great-grandfather, had been appointed director of the Jiangning Bureau 60 years earlier, the Cao family had worked and lived in Nanjing. Now, looking back on that majestic city, the family felt that they, in the end, must call a strange land home. Over the course of 60 years, under the supervision of 3 generations of the Cao family, countless sheets of gorgeous silk were shipped to Beijing. There they not only adorned the members of the royal family in the Forbidden City, but were given to officials as rewards. Some even ended up in European courts. But in the end, for the Cao family, all they'd been doing, to borrow a memorable phrase from the novel itself, was sewing a wedding gown for another bride to wear. And yet, perhaps the silver linings of these black clouds of misfortune were already showing. Maybe something was already taking shape in the forlorn figure of the 13-year-old Cao Xueqin, scuffing along in the procession of imperial prisoners that would, one day, transform his family's descent from glory to misery into literary gold. Had it not been fate's intention all along to cast him out of his luxurious mansion, so he'd get to meet all the Yinglians and Caltrops. Sure enough, the ingredients for a masterpiece were already beginning to coalesce in his soul.